Today's workshop is Equitable and Inclusive Environments for Every Family, Stopping the Suspension and Expulsion of Preschoolers in Vermont. I'm excited to introduce you to Katie McCarthy, Masters of Education, Early Childhood Special Education Coordinator on the Early Education Team at the Vermont Agency of Education, and Amy Murphy, Masters of Education, Early Education Inclusion Coordinator on the Early Education Team at the Vermont Agency of Education. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Karen. I do want to specify too, within that, we've expanded the title a little bit since it was submitted. For each and every family, stopping the suspension expulsion of preschoolers with disabilities in Vermont. So this workshop will focus mostly on children with disabilities, ages 3 through 5, in suspension and expulsion. Of course, the historical research and data that we get to does expand that outside to include all children. Next slide. This is our contact information, and Amy is going to, if she hasn't already, put it in chat. The best way to get in touch with us is through email, as we both work mostly remotely. But please contact us at any time. Next slide. I did want to point out a few foundational documents that we start every webinar with within early childhood special education at the Agency of Education. And one is the DEC recommended practices. DEC stands for the Division for Early Childhood of the Council of Exceptional Children, and it promotes policies and advances evidence-based practices that support families and enhance the optimal development of young children from ages 0 to age 8 who have or are at risk for developmental delays and disabilities. This is an international membership organization for those who work with or on behalf of young children 0 to 8. The purpose of the DEC recommended practices is to highlight those practices specifically known to promote the outcomes of young children who have or are at risk for developmental delays and disabilities, and to support their families in accordance with the DEC and a National Association of Education of Young Children, NAEYC, position statement in 2009 on early childhood inclusion. The DEC recommended practices support children's access and participation in inclusive settings and natural environments and address cultural, linguistic, and ability diversity. We believe that the practitioners and families have the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to implement these practices as intended. Children who have or are at risk for developmental delays and disabilities and their families are more likely to achieve positive outcomes, and families and practitioners are more likely to help children achieve their highest potential. And focus on family. Family is one of the areas, the 8 areas within the DEC recommended practices. And this family practices refer to ongoing activities that promote active participation of families, lead to development of a service plan or a set of goals to support and for families and children to achieve those goals, or support families in achieving goals that they hold for their child and other family members. So if you think of this as kind of the umbrella of what we're talking about with suspension, expulsion, and focus on that family partnership. Next slide. Another foundational document that we use daily in our work at the Agency of Education and Early Childhood is the guiding principles, or supporting each and every young child's full and equitable participation. This document came about after in September of 2017, after input from diverse stakeholders, including families, and a statewide validation process. This was endorsed by different agencies, groups. It describes what individuals, organizations, and communities understand and do to realize the promise of each and every child from birth to grade 3 in Vermont. A link to the supporting each and every young child's full and equitable participation will be found at the end of the presentation. This is awareness that this is what we want. So I want to point out that this is what we want for each and every child and their family in Vermont. And some of the principles that are listed in the document are easier and have been established, while there are others that are still in process, and some are going to take much more work and time to get there. Next slide. We also base our work on considerations of equity. There are around an average of 1,500 3 to 5-year-old students with disabilities in Vermont, and over 400 public and private universal pre-K programs. So within that context, the importance of equity is really paramount within our work. So we look at two major considerations of equity as a role: providing high quality early education programs that build on each child's unique individual and family strengths, cultural background, language, abilities, and experiences. And two, the consideration of eliminating differences in educational outcomes as a result of who children are, where they live, and what resources their families have. Next slide. So our main objective today is to increase family awareness and knowledge of exclusionary discipline and its outcomes for young students with disabilities in Vermont. We'll be looking at history and research, the national and state landscape, and also some questions that families can ask in relation to suspension, expulsion, and best practices and high quality early education programs. Next slide. So we're going to start with some background on exclusionary discipline in early education. Next slide. So what is exclusionary discipline? Well, within the realm of pre-K through 12, in education, exclusionary discipline is broadly defined as suspension and expulsion. We can look at suspensions within in-classroom suspensions, and that's the placement of a student in a specified supervised location other than the child's regular classroom, and out of classroom suspensions as the removal of a student from classroom off premises, and expulsion as the permanent removal of the student from their classroom. Next slide. In recognition of the importance of addressing suspension and expulsion, the U.S. Departments of Education and Health and Human Services issued a policy statement on expulsion and suspension policies in early childhood education in 2014. And this provides recommendations to states and local early childhood programs to prevent and severely limit expulsions and suspensions in early learning settings. These recommendations include the implementation of multi-tiered systems of support, such as the pyramid model, and the training of staff in implementing prevention and intervention strategies, and ensuring equitable practices that are free of bias and discrimination. And we're lucky to have used recent title money and grant money to implement the pyramid model and coaching within Vermont. We've been a pyramid model state for a long time, which is giving that multi-tiered system of support. So if you are a practitioner or an educator, please contact Amy Murphy for more information on pyramid model coaching sessions that are currently happening. And one part that I wanted to point out that really stuck out to me in the federal policy statement is the earliest years of a child's life are critical for building the foundation of learning and wellness needed for future success in school and later in life. During these years, children's brains are developing rapidly, influenced by their experiences, both positive and negative. As a nation, we share the responsibility of ensuring that all of our young children have access to enriching opportunities that will set them up for success and empower them to be our future leaders. By expelling or suspending 3 and 4-year-olds, we do just the opposite. We set their trajectories in a negative direction before their first day of kindergarten. We will not hinder their social emotional development during a highly formative period. We also remove them from early learning programs and corresponding cognitively enriching experiences that we know contribute to academic success. Next slide. Decades of research tell us that high quality early care and education programs impact children in meaningful and lasting ways, especially for those most at risk for educational challenges. The primary goal of early care and education is to promote overall school readiness, especially for those needing the most assistance. And this is a quote from Walter Gilliam in his 2014, What Could Make Less Sense, the Expelling of Preschool. Clearly, expelling or suspending preschoolers counters the overall objective of early education programs to promote school readiness in order to improve later educational success. Next slide. Expelling preschoolers is not an intervention. When a child is suspended from school, it not only impacts the child, but the entire family. Parents often feel isolated and ashamed. They may also feel defeated with nowhere to turn. Many families worry about the impact of suspension on the child's future, losing their job to care for the child during suspension period, their child being targeted, and the child's ability to develop and maintain positive relationships with teachers and peers. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about research and data. And really, it began, there are decades of data on suspension and expulsion, but really came into focus with Walter Gilliam. He is a Yale professor and researcher. In 2005, his pre-kindergartners left behind expulsion rates in state pre-kindergarten systems. And that continued with the 2014 civil rights data collection, which for the very first time included preschool in the reporting with exclusionary discipline. So that really brought that into focus. These results immediately drew readers to alarming results about disproportionality and disparities. For example, the results of the 2014 civil rights data collection showed that approximately 5,000 preschoolers were suspended at least once in 2012, and of those, nearly 2,500 were suspended a second time. And we've seen other studies, such as the 2016 National Survey of Children's Health and the most recent 2021 civil rights data collection. And to clarify, when we're looking at civil rights data collections, it's released in a year, but it's showing 3 years, 2 to 3 years behind. So the 2021 civil rights data collection is actually data from 2018 to 2019. And we're showing that it continues to exhibit disparities between race, gender, and disability. Next slide. This is data from the 2016 National Survey of Children's Health, which found that 50,000 preschoolers were suspended at least once, and another 17,000 were expelled. On average, that means that 250 preschoolers were expelled or suspended every school day, which is much more than their older peers. The survey also found that children in pre-K are expelled at 3 times the rate of K through 12 students, while children in childcare programs were expelled at 13 times the rate of K through 12 students. Overwhelmingly, preschoolers and K through students who are disciplined resemble the adults we see behind bars. They are students of color, male students, students with disabilities, students living in poverty, and those that are homeless. Next slide. This is the most recent discipline practices in preschool from the Civil Rights Data Collection, which was released in July 2021. This is based on 2017. This is 2017-2018 data because it's a few years behind. 2,822 preschoolers received at least one out-of-school suspension. Further disparities include Black preschoolers receiving one or more suspensions, which is 2.5 times the rate than their share of the total preschool population. Also, among girls, Black preschool girls were the only group where a disparity was observed, among girls. So Black preschool girls accounted for 8.6% of the total preschool population or preschool enrollment, but received 9%, just over 9% of one or more out-of-school suspensions. Next slide. And disparities in expulsion, similar in showing issues within race and also disability. Race isn't the only factor that contributes to high rates of exclusionary discipline. National data shows that students with disabilities who are served by IDA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, were expelled 2.5 times greater than their share of the total preschool population. Despite their age, 306 preschoolers were expelled in 2017 to 2018. Black students and students served under IDA were disproportionately expelled. Okay, next slide. So in Vermont, with the passage of Act 35, which prohibits exclusionary discipline, broadly defined as suspension and expulsion for children under 8, and we'll get to that and what that means in a little bit. This has led to an increase in the attention to the use of exclusionary discipline in Vermont, as well as prevention strategies in early childhood settings. Building Bright Futures produced this exclusionary discipline brief in light of Act 35 in recognition of the importance of high quality early childhood education, settings for children's social emotional development, and readiness for learning, and given the increases in acuity and frequency of mental, emotional, and behavioral health related incidents. Using evidence and data to inform policy is very critical to ensuring an integrated continuum of comprehensive, high quality services that is equitable, accessible, and will improve outcomes for each and every Vermont child in the prenatal period through age 8 and their families. Annual reporting on quantitative and exclusionary discipline incidents for children under age 5, including children that are in universal pre-K, is not publicly reportable because of for the individual school years of 2018 through 2021 in order to protect student privacy due to the numbers. However, we know that the low numbers of exclusionary discipline incidents reported by programs, because reporting is required in universal pre-K programs, that it may not accurately reflect the full picture for Vermont children and their families. We hypothesize that this is very underreported. Next slide. The Universal Pre-K Early Education Team has an ACCESS monitoring. Its accountability and continuous improvement system is what ACCESS stands for. And that monitors all violations for pre-qualified universal pre-K programs within Vermont. So if there is a complaint of a suspension or expulsion for a child under the age of 5, that can be reported in any of the, by any mechanism or individual that you see listed on the screen. That includes families and caregivers. We hear from school districts, special educators, service providers. We also work with Child Development Division in hearing about licensing violations, as reporting exclusionary discipline is a requirement with universal pre-kindergartens. From spring 2020 to spring 2022, the UPK Access Monitoring Team had investigated 63 incidents of violations of all kinds across pre-qualified universal pre-K programs. 27 of those incidents, or about 43%, involved exclusionary discipline practices, including both suspension and expulsion. And of those incidents, 14, or 52%, involved children with disabilities on an individualized education plan, or IEP. And slides 16 and 17 are right from the Building Bright Futures exclusionary discipline report. If you're interested in reading more about that report, you can link at the end. Next slide, please. So why does this matter? What is the effect? Next slide. You may have heard the term preschool to prison pipeline. And during the last several decades, research has really begun to show parallels between the chain of events in preschool suspension and expulsion and mimicking what the same demographic that we often see in prisons. So this infographic shows breaking the prison pipeline. You can see the dot in between there, but it starts with lack of processes and policies in suspensions in education, and then stress providers or educators with implicit biases. The child's suspended or expelled. The child is deprived of valuable learning. School zero tolerance policies. This is where we've started to see a tick, and zero tolerance policies are those policies where, example, and not specific to Vermont, but nationally, you see a child on the news where they're a 3 or 4-year-old or a 5-year-old is arrested for bringing a toy gun to school, or for having a tantrum in the classroom. And these zero tolerance policies are linked that to a child being arrested and suspended for minor offenses in K through 12 to being likely incarcerated in the future. The child is more likely to experience later academic failure in K through 12, and then as an adult, more likely to be incarcerated. We know that young students who are expelled or suspended in early childhood are 10 times more likely to experience future academic failure, be retained in a grade, drop out of high school, and face jail time. Next slide. Expulsion and suspension practices may also delay or interfere with the process of identifying and addressing underlying issues, which may include disabilities or mental health issues with the child. So some children may have an undiagnosed disability or behavior health issues, trauma, and they may be eligible for additional services, but in simply being suspended or expelled, they may not receive the evaluations or the referrals that they need to obtain those services. For example, the source of challenging behavior may be communication and language difficulties, skills that can be improved through early assessment and intervention services could help that. But in a case like that, appropriate evaluation and follow-up services are critical, but they're less likely if the child is expelled from the system. Expulsions may also contribute to increased family stress and burden. In many cases, families of children who are expelled do not receive assistance in identifying an alternative placement, leaving the burden of finding another program entirely to the family. There may be challenges accessing another program, particularly an affordable, high-quality program. Even in cases where assistance is offered, often there's a lapse in service, which leaves families, especially working families, in difficult situations. Furthermore, if administered in a discriminatory manner, suspensions and expulsions of children may violate federal civil rights laws. The Department of Education and the Department of Justice issued guidance explaining the obligation of recipients of federal financial assistance to administer student discipline without regard to race, color, or national origin. Next slide. The following slide shows some examples of what exclusionary discipline may look like or sound like in early childhood classrooms today. Although we may not label all of our exclusionary discipline practices in early childhood or early education as suspensions or expulsions, it is important to recognize that they are the equivalent of suspending or expelling a child. Suspensions and expulsions are types of exclusionary practices that ask children to leave the classroom, program, or school temporarily or permanently. Next slide. So this is another infographic from SRI, which is a technical assistance company. What do exclusionary discipline practices look like in early childhood settings? It could look like a child being sent out of the classroom, such as to a director's office. Out of school suspension could look like asking a family to pick up their child early because of behavioral issues, for biting, hitting, not following directions. Expulsion could look like telling a family that they will need to find another care arrangement because the child is not a good fit for the program, or that the program can no longer support their preschooler. A soft expulsion could look like, and we'll just say expulsion and not soft expulsion, but often they're called soft expulsions. Asking the family repeatedly to pick their child up early because of behavior issues, requiring them to leave or miss work frequently. And there are, and I do want to say, and we're not going to get too much into this during this workshop today, but there are ranges. Of course, we're looking at developmentally appropriateness too. So for example, an in-school suspension looking like sending the child out of the classroom to the director's office. There's a difference between having that, if your child is on an IEP, having that in a plan where once a day they check in with the director. There's a difference between that and having a plan and just sending a child to the director's office to get them out of the classroom. So there are different, I don't want to say levels, but there's education and guidance that go along with that, and professional decisions. Next slide, please.
So Katie, we are at about 1:30.
Okay, thanks. Okay, great. So again, what suspension and expulsion may sound like. Don't bring him in tomorrow. Why don't you have him join us for half a day for the next few weeks? Our program just isn't right for her. Your child will be placed in a toddler room since he is not ready for pre-K. That is what some suspension and expulsions may sound like. And with students with IEPs, on the next slide, we maybe will hear your child can't come unless a support person is there with them. Their challenging behavior has nothing to do with their disability. We can't provide the services your child needs. And with that, and with children on IEPs, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's really important that children on IEPs, that their IEP is considered and that there is a plan in place to make sure that their rights and their free and appropriate education is not being violated by leaving the classroom. Next slide. Okay, so what does exclusionary, sorry, one second. Okay, so why does exclusionary discipline happen? Next slide. I can 100% guarantee that no early educator, no child director, no principal No one involved in early education goes in with intent to suspend or expel a child. We go into, and as a former teacher, I say we too, we go into education because we love children, that we like education and working with children. So why does it happen then? And here are some reasons for exclusionary discipline. There are a variety of reasons of why children are suspended or expelled. Typically, if a child is removed from a program, it's because of challenging behavior. Teachers and other staff also might be concerned about the safety of the child and other children in the program. Other factors may include teachers being overwhelmed and staff being overwhelmed by a child's behavior, and that could be because of a lack of education or skills with working with children with quote unquote, challenging behavior. It could be work conditions, including low salaries. That may contribute to teachers feeling stressed or depressed. That can affect their behavior management skills or tolerance for problem behaviors. Classroom conditions, such as higher teacher ratios, may affect a teacher's ability to manage a classroom and deal effectively with children who display challenging behavior. Teachers may misunderstand a young child's challenging behavior. For example, you have a child that has experienced trauma. They may be engaged in more aggressive behaviors or use hurtful language. Their behavior may be interpreted as willful or purposeful instead of a reaction to their early life experiences. Implicit bias, which we're going to talk a little bit on the next slide, but implicit bias is the unconscious negative beliefs that we all have. And that may affect how, for example, African-American boys in particular are viewed. Teachers may unknowingly view African-American or Black boys as more difficult to control or harmful. This may lead them to respond more often with harsh consequences, and they may be recommended to be expelled. Early child programs may have limited resources and capacity to support staff who have difficulty with a particular child. And finally, lack of universal practices and data collection and data-based decision-making may also lead to exclusionary discipline. And universal practices are those practices that are for everyone. So what universal practices may look like in a classroom, that may be your daily schedule. It may be a sign of when children come in to identify their feelings. It is a practice that everyone receives and usually revolve around social emotional transitions, rules, and routines. Okay, next slide. Okay, so when we're looking at implicit bias are the attitudes, stereotypes, and excuse me, and beliefs, and that can affect how we treat children. Implicit bias is not intentional, but it can still impact how we judge others based on factors such as race, ability, culture, language, gender. Speaking from a personal place, I have extremely tall children, and I've seen implicit biases from other people. I was in a store when my child, who's now 17, was 3, but he was the size of a 6-year-old. So, why is this child acting this way when they're, but he was only 3, but size-wise. So we know that with student size, and the same with children that are smaller in stature, being treated as being younger. So in early childhood settings, implicit biases can affect how providers perceive and respond to children, which can lead to unfair differences in the use of exclusionary discipline practices such as suspension and expulsion. Okay, next slide. So here are some considerations with children that have, sorry, one second, with children that have an IEP. So considerations with Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. When a child with a disability demonstrates behavior that impedes their learning or that of others, appropriate behavioral supports may be necessary to ensure that that child receives their FAPE or free and appropriate public education that is equal to their non-disabled peers. So in that case, with a child that already has an IEP, the IEP team must consider, and when determined necessary, to ensure FAPE, including revising or including behavioral supports in the child's IEP. When they're developing, when the team, and that includes families, are developing, reviewing, or revising the IEP team should determine whether behavioral supports are needed to ensure FAPE, and that may be special education and related services. It could mean supplementary aids and services, program modifications, or supports for school personnel. Under IDEA, special education and related services and supplementary aids and services are to be based on peer-reviewed research to the extent practicable, so that behavior supports are supported by evidence. They're supported by evidence-based practice and research. If the child is on an IEP and receiving special education services, the pre-K program where the child attends must contact the school district and the early childhood special education staff or the director of student support services. If a child is suspended or expelled for more than 10 days, and that's consecutively or cumulatively, then the school district must convene a manifestation determination hearing to determine if the removal of that child is considered a change of placement for that child. And that is specific for students that are on IEPs or individualized education programs that being removed from that placement or that environment that is named on their IEP, if that has changed. So a meeting is required to determine if appropriate services and placement are being met. Okay, next slide. So here are some questions that families can ask. If your child is, or if the classroom or educator, or you're being asked to, or you feel that your child is being suspended or expelled. Our program, classroom policies, practices, and procedures being modified to meet my child's individual needs. What data and documentation has already been collected? So your child is asked to leave a program or your child is being sent home. Well, what data and documentation have you collected already? Data and documentation can tell us a lot about a child. You know, is this happening mostly when they're going out to the playground? Maybe the child is struggling with transitions. Or is it in the morning when the child comes in? So having that consistent data and documentation can be very telling to all adults involved of how to help this child without being suspended or expelled. If your child is on an IEP, when can we meet to discuss my child's IEP? Or if they're on a 504 plan, to meet to discuss their progress. What universal practices are being implemented with the entire classroom? So it's a little repetitive in that question, but when we say universal practices, as I had mentioned earlier, those are the practices to support each and every child in that classroom. They apply to everyone. And what research has found, and our colleagues at the NCPMI, the National Pyramid Model Institute, what they have found is that a lot of times universal practices aren't happening in the classroom. And we already come in with, let's put this child on a behavior plan, or, you know, this child is suspended or expelled. When those universal practices that can apply to everyone, such as schedules in the classroom, being greeted every day, things like that, that can be put into place individual schedules that would help everyone. And does my child continue to receive their IEP services with their same age peers? Okay, next slide. So we also wanted to take a moment to, because the positive side is inclusion. And inclusion is what we want for each and every child in Vermont. Next slide. Vermont is a highly inclusive state. We've always been around 70% of children with IEPs receiving education in a regular education environment with their same age peers. So in my position, there is one of me in every state, and there are states that still have special education programs where children with disabilities are in a separate classroom. And Vermont historically has always been very inclusive. But we also know too that, and we're looked at as having high inclusion, and other states want to know how we have that. And universal pre-K has been wonderful for those partnerships between private programs and school districts as well with that. But we also know that it's a quality piece too. So environments that are considered regular education would be universal pre-K, public and private. They would be licensed and regulated childcare, family childcare homes, and Head Starts. We know that quality matters, and that's an area that as a state we continue to work on. Okay, next slide. There are two major, sorry, I forgot they floated in. There are two major federal documents that echo the importance of inclusion and high quality inclusion across all environments. The first is the 2015 U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Education joint policy statement on inclusion of children with disabilities in early childhood programs. And the purpose of that statement was to set a vision and provide recommendations for increasing the inclusion of not only preschool children with disabilities, but also infant and toddlers in high quality early childhood programs. It states that the path ahead lies in community-wide partnerships that bring together families, early childhood programs, schools, state leaders to build a nationwide culture of inclusion. And that's supported by the legal foundations of inclusion. And it also adds that educators should intentionally promote participation in all learning and social activities while using evidence-based practices and supports to foster that development and friendship with peers and that sense of belonging. And also the 2017 Dear Colleague letter on preschool least restrictive environment, which was published by the U.S. Department of Education, reaffirmed that position statement that all young children with disabilities should have access to inclusive, high quality early child programs where they are provided with individualized and appropriate supports to enable them to meet high expectations. The next slide. When we talk about why inclusion, high quality inclusion in early childhood programs can set a trajectory for inclusion across the life course. It's critical for Vermont administrators, practitioners, educators, and families to work together to improve outcomes for children with disabilities by meeting their needs to the maximum extent possible in a regular early childhood program or setting. We know through decades of research that separate special education classrooms with the goal of working toward full inclusion or a parole approach does not work and can have detrimental effects on a child with special needs for a lifetime. So that would be, okay, we're gonna, put you over in this program and then you're gonna work your way into a regular education setting. And we know that that does not work and is not research or evidence-based practice. Okay, next slide. So circling back to Vermont policy. So in addition to policy and law changes that we've seen federally, The Vermont Agency of Education it is offering those trainings I mentioned before. I'm going to put another plug in now for the nationally renowned Pyramid Model Consortium, which focuses on promotion of preventative, universal, high quality, inclusive practices in classrooms to all Vermont adults working with universal pre-K public and private programs. So it's not just for educators, and that includes special educators, related service providers, administrators, support staff, and we'll continue to work with that over the next 2 years as well, with additional grants to continue that work for coaches in the classroom to help sustain those high quality processes. But these are, on this slide, this represents some newer Vermont policies that have gone into effect. Act 35 of 2021, that prohibits exclusionary discipline, broadly defined as suspension and expulsion, for children under 8. And 16 VSA, which was implemented in 2022, that amended Act 35 to extend prohibition of suspension and expulsion for children under age 8 to approved independent schools and pre-qualified private pre-K programs. And there are 2 exclusionary discipline memos for educators from Secretary French at the Vermont Agency of Education that were sent to superintendents and principals regarding guidance on suspension and expulsion under age 8 in schools. That guidance for private programs is forthcoming. Okay. Next slide. So what should families look for and expect in a high quality, inclusive early education setting? You want to look for that you are considered an expert. You are your foremost expert on your child. And as such, exchanging information relevant to your child's culture, social, emotional, and behavior strengths and concerns and approaches to learning and strategies that work at home is very important. At minimum, programs should ensure that their families have information on a child's health, behavior, development, especially the social emotional development during the hours that they are in the early education setting, that families are aware of developmental milestones, healthy development and behavior, and places that families can go for help, that they identify a high quality early learning program, and that communicating with program or school personnel and advocating for their child. How does that happen? You also want to look for regular bi-directional communication, which basically means that, you know, it's just not the school sending you information on your child, that there is an avenue that you both agree on that you can communicate back and forth because you both have a lot to share. Progress updates and meetings, universal supports and evidence-based practices happening within the classroom, accommodations and modifications to access and participate in the classroom across all areas, and that they are being culturally and linguistically responsive to your family's needs. Next slide.
Okay, and Katie, we are about 10 minutes till the end.
Okay, I just have 2 more slides. So we're good. So be ready for some questions. Engaging families is a key part of high quality early care and education. And families are their child's first teachers, primary supporters of their healthy social, emotional, cognitive, and physical development of their children. Preventing expulsion and suspension requires that strong partnership with families. So as a family, you're looking for that team approach, that you know the policies and practices of the classroom that your child attends, that you do have that ongoing bi-directional communication. Your child should be attending regularly and regular attendance is important, and not only building those relationships and within the education process, but also learning those routine and rituals within that classroom. And also share your child's story. You need to share your child's story. What do they enjoy doing? What are their strengths? What do they want to be when they grow up? Who are the important people in their lives? Helps strengthen that bond and allows educators to know more about your child. Okay, and next slide. Okay, and on this slide here, these will be some hyperlinked resources. Of course, to the Vermont Family Network, which if you found your way, you have that information already, I'm sure. But also to the Vermont Early Learning Standards. They are birth through age 8 standards. This is specific to the family resources. The DEC Family Practice Guide on Behaviors is a helpful tool to work with your children at home. Help Us Have a Good Day, visual supports, and the family engagement resources are all from NCPMI, and they are really great resources to help you with your child at home, as well as communicate with the school. So we can, on the next slide is just my contact information and Amy's contact information. And on the slide after that are some resources and research that were used in the preparation of this webinar. And they all are also on some of the slides as well. So I know that was a lot of information. You can always reach out to us, but I think we're ready to take some questions.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Katie. Just to let everyone know, we have about half a dozen questions. People are still welcome to put questions in the chat. We will go ahead, I think if it's okay with the presenters, that if answering the questions goes beyond 2, that we continue to record this. And for people who have to hop off at 2, you should be able to see the questions addressed in our recording. So I'll go ahead and read the questions that we received before and during the presentation. And again, please feel free to put any more questions in the chat. So some of these might have been partially answered in your presentation, but I'll run through them anyway. So if the student on an IEP is placed in a private pre-K, do these rules apply?
Yes, they do. And I'm assuming you mean, I'm not sure what you mean by these rules, but a child's placement or environment in which they receive their special education services, that is designated on their IEP. And that could be, doesn't have to be in a school, it could be anywhere, it could be at home. I mean, it could be that it doesn't, it's whatever the IEP decides. But if the child is, in order for that child to receive their education in the free appropriate public education, then yes, that they need to apply. So if you want to reach out to me separately, like if there's a different case, because it is a little bit more complicated than that. But yes, their rights still follow them if they have an IEP, their educational rights.
And the question came up during the slide that you were talking about, communication before that suspension and expulsion best practices and that application. And then also when you were talking about manifestation determination hearings.
Yeah, yep, yes, they would both apply in an education setting. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. Is excluding a student from a whole group activity considered an in-school suspension?
Again, I would need a little bit more information on that. But if it is, first want to see, I guess you would need to have more information. I would need to have more information on what the background is on having that child excluded. If a child is melting down, you know, what happened up to that point. If it is close to nap time. If it's something that is repetitively happening and educators are saying, oh, they can't participate in this activity, they have no control, then that would be a suspension. The difference would be that if, for example, a child is having difficulty on the playground, there may be a plan put in place where the child, because they are struggling, that they they have an integration, I guess, plan, you could call it, or a support plan to make sure that that child eventually is full-time with their same age peers and participating in the activity. Then that would be a little different. Amy, did you want to add anything on that?
I would just say that usually when we talk to programs, talk to educators, parents, families, anybody that's contacting us, we emphasize the need for data collection and things to be database decision making, like include that database decision making progress, because if decisions are being made and there's no data to show if they're effective or not, that's not helpful. So we want a rationale to be backed by data, a plan in place that shows, like Katie was saying, the reintegration process, and then show if the supports that are being put in place to get to those steps of reintegration, if those are effective, all data-based.
Thank you. For those who have to hop off soon, please take note that we have a link to the evaluation in the chat. So if you could please take some time to fill that out, would really appreciate it. Okay, I'll go to the next question. If a young child is sent home over and over, but it isn't called a suspension because it's not allowed, what should a parent do? This is happening more and more as staffing issues are making it challenging for kids to get the level of support that they need.
Yeah, if that is happening, please reach out to us. We do have families reach out to us. When that is happening, we can contact the program and look into it a little bit more and get some information on it. But if you're being asked for your child to be picked up every day or repeatedly, then that is your child is being suspended in an education setting. Mm-hmm.
So you've been talking about pre-K, and I think this question is about childcare. Where can families go for childcare if their child is not able to be supported successfully in a childcare setting?
That would be, I mean, if you're talking primarily with about childcare, then that would be a question for Agency Human Services. Amy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I was just thinking if they're talking about a universal pre-K private program, then again, they could. We would ask people if they want to contact us, and then we can reach out and if there is an IEP in place, kind of facilitate that communication between maybe the private program and the school district to see if a support can be put in place or additional supports can be put in place. So I do wonder if they're talking about a universal pre-K partner program versus just a child care center.
So another question, professionals' confusion. What is allowable when support around self-regulation is needed outside the classroom?
Again, I think that goes back to the data collection and the universal practices that are being put in place.
Yeah, this is a question we get a lot. There's a lot of misconceptions around, the in classroom or out of classroom suspension, and that, like Katie's saying, we emphasize that database decision making, have a plan in place, ensuring also that the family is aware of the plan, part of the plan, creating the plan on how to support that child. And if it is, for example, if it's, let's take a walk to try to get some sensory input, just show that through data that is an effective support for the child, and have have data to show the rationale behind making that decision and ensuring that the family is on board, they're agreeing with that, they support that. And then, if it is effective, how do we reintegrate and spend more time into that classroom instead of, making that a daily, is there a way we can integrate that idea and concept within the classroom with same age peers?
Okay, I think you might have covered some of this in your presentation. Someone is asking what the rate of expulsion and suspension of pre-K children in Vermont prior to the new rule.
So that information, again, between, I think, was 2018 and 2020, the numbers were not large enough to be released. So anyway, but we hypothesized that it was similar in what it is today.
Okay. Does this preschool program telling a parent that their child needs to be on a modified day count as a suspension / expulsion? And what if the parent doesn't agree?
Yeah. So yes, that is, if a parent does not agree with that, that is a discussion that needs to happen with the child's teacher. I would need more information too about does this child have an IEP? What data has been collected, as we had said. So there's a little bit more investigation that needs to go in that as well. But yes, a modified day that interferes with that 10 hours of education would be considered a suspension. And if the parents don't agree, they're not involved in that decision.
And yeah, if educators, if they have questions about that, they can always reach out to us. Families, if they have questions, they can reach out to us. We take calls from the whole spectrum.
Okay, let me see. There's another question. Many pre-qualified pre-K partner programs are full day, full time. Do these suspension and expulsion rules only apply for the 10 hours of pre-K or for the full, possibly 50 hours per week that the child attends a private program?
Amy?
Well, when we were creating guidance, and this, we do co-oversee public and private programs with CDD, Child Development Division. So the guidance that we've created, we've vetted through our lawyers and asked them this very question. And as of right now, we do look at the classroom. So we're not looking specifically within the 10 hours, we're looking within the classroom. And I think the question has circled again around to lawyers within CDD and the AOE, but as of right now, we do look at the classroom. So again, those individual scenarios, contact us and we can walk through and look exactly, to see what's going on.
And another question just popped up. How or is the process protocol different if the child is not, or maybe not yet, on an IEP?
Go ahead, Amy.
Well, I was just going to say that kind of goes back. I mean, Act 35 and the amended, the amendment under Title 16 that applies to each and every child that are enrolled in a universal pre-K program. Then it goes to, how things are going to be a little different then I'm going to refer back to Katie and the slide, when you were talking about that manifestation determination.
Yep. Yeah. So if you have a child that is on an IEP, then it goes, and they have been suspended or expelled more than 10 days, and that is either cumulatively or all at once. That is when their regular education placement is obviously they're not in it, or they've missed 10 days. So that can be an issue of your child not receiving their services, which is and not receiving their services within that setting. So, so that is when manifestation determination goes into effect, and that needs to be looked at further. So, the process or protocol, if the child is not yet on an IEP, again, that goes back to what data has been collected within the classroom, what universal supports are put in place. So you're really looking at that first. What has been tried? Again, like we know, we've seen the reasons of why children are suspended or expelled and what happens. No one goes into early education to suspend or expel a child. Like I stick by and stand by that statement. However, all of those factors, implicit bias, overwork, underpaid, not having the tools, that all factors in. And what we see are that being the first point to go to. Well, this child just needs to leave, because that is, frankly, that's easiest for the adult, right? Having the child leave. That's not what's best for the child. So, so again, it's looking at if those practices and procedures are in place, so that that data is collected to make that are these is this working for this child, and what can work for this child and the rest of the children in the classroom.
Yeah, we don't want to put the onus on the child. We look at, like Katie's saying, those practices, we look at that data to make sure that, each adult is using those universal practices consistently across all the routines and activities. And then, then we're also looking at that child data, but we don't want to put the onus on the child. It's really how we as adults are interacting with that child and our response, when those challenging behaviors arise. So that's how we really want to frame the conversation.
What if there is a safety issue to removing the child from the classroom to find some calm and co-regulate, to find some calm and co-regulate in a room that offers these materials?
Again, what is happening, what has happened for that child to get to that point, and knowing the child, knowing the background, what's happening at home, what's happened in the past, but taking a child out of their environment consistently is not going to be what's best for that child and their peers. And I say that not in a way, I say that from an inclusion standpoint too. Yes, of course, if there's a safety issue and removing the child so that they don't hurt, and we're still working on the definition of imminent harm with CDD, but it's important because if you have a child that is removed consistently from a classroom, there is a stigma attached to that too that will follow that child as well. So you're looking at those long-term effects. So if that's an immediate issue that happened that day, that were there signs before? What data has been collected in the past? What do you know about the family? What do you know about that child? That goes into creating a plan for this child so that this child is safe and other children in the classroom are safe as well. And it's just not removing the child consistently from the classroom. Amy, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I would just say, and if they do create a plan, and that is that a component on the plan, then to collect data to show that that's effective, and again, have a reintegration plan as another part of that, another component within that plan. So.
And I would say with those materials, is there a way to incorporate those materials within the classroom as a universal practice, or something that everyone has those materials that makes them feel safe? So it's not just one person, that it's everyone that maybe is getting that as a regulation, a calm
Yeah, we've given the example before, you know, if there's a movement activity and you're collecting data on one child to see if that's effective and helping them, each and every child in the classroom is still experiencing that movement activity. You're just collecting data on that one child. So as a parent, as a family member, you know, that's what you would want to see within your plan, and you would want to hear that's how the plan is being created, because like Katie was saying, you don't want that sense of membership and belonging to be interrupted by, you know, having to be pulled out of a classroom. You know, it would be much better if we could create something within. And again, if people want to reach out to us, we can help. We can try to explore ideas and see, you know, how that might be possible. So.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up with one more question here. How are preschools and childcares being held accountable to these new laws and rules when they continue to suspend and expel children?
That's a really great question. Going back to a previous slide where we have reporting. Do we know that suspension and expulsions have been happening for years in different places in Vermont? Yes. Now we have a law that backs that up as well. We know practices and education can help. So it's reporting. If all universal pre-kindergartens are required to contact the school district, or if they're at the school district, they're required to report, and that report comes to us so that we know if children are being suspended or expelled. With that being said, that can happen in different ways. We hear from families a lot if their child is being suspended or expelled. So if that is happening, or if you hear, we hear from different educators from, you know, different programs, or hearing about programs, or childcare. So so if you do hear, we just ask that you contact us, and that we work with the programs to make sure that they're clear on what the law is, and what the responsibility is for suspending or expelling children under 8.
Okay, well, thank you, Katie and Amy, for all this information, and thank you also for staying after to answer all of the questions. So for people who are still on, you'll see the link to the evaluation in our chat. Please take time to fill that out so we can make improvements and also fulfill our grant requirements. We have many other workshops coming up. You can find details on those on our website. We have tons of information on our website. Getting connected to us is easy. You can also follow us on Facebook or join our closed Facebook page if you are a parent. You can also sign up for our monthly e-news. Check out our YouTube channel. We're here to help. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.